Hello and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to cover another clone, but there's reason for it, because at the end of the day, ZX Spectrums, Commodore 64, Amigas and so on, what's going to happen eventually is they're going to fail. There's going to be less and less of them. And one of the biggest things about computers, and even retro computers, even current machines, is the software. You see, without the software, you're never going to get the flavor of what the machines were like back in whichever period you're interested in. So, for example, on a ZX Spectrum, if you wanted to play Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy or something similar, well, that's of the era, that's of the time. So playing those games or running software from the era gives you a really good understanding of how, you know, people used the machines and how the software kind of really did hold it together. It was like the glue that held the systems together, because without the software, the systems aren't really going to do a lot, are they? They're just going to basically sit there like lumps of plastic and glass. It's nice to be able to preserve machines from the past, so you are basically preserving the way these machines worked, looked, felt and so on. But with clones, if you do a modern clone, you've got a 30-year lifespan if they're looked after from now. So if you do a ZX Spectrum clone, such as the Harlequin in a ZX Spectrum case, it looks either like a Plus or a standard rubber keyed Spectrum, then that machine's going to give you the experience of doing exactly the same with the same software that people were doing back in the early 80s. So it's kind of going to allow people to experience the computers for a lot longer, and the software and what people did with them. Now, this clone is very different. It's not my usual kind of clone, because my usual kind of clone are based in and around the look and the feel of the original machine. So really, unless you kind of looked around the machines, took the lid off, looked at the ports on the back, you wouldn't really know that you were using a recreated machine, such as a Harlequin clone, which was literally off-the-shelf components reworked to be able to do what a ZX Spectrum does. And they look and they feel exactly the same. Well, this one's not quite that. Originally, I wasn't really going to go down this route of getting one of these machines, because I kind of thought, well, I'm not so sure whether it's actually worth doing, simply because they're never going to give the look and feel of the original equipment. But, you know, I kind of thought about it for a while, and I thought, why not? It's still a clone, it still can be used, it can still run the software. So what we've done is I've got put together a ZX Pico, which is here. It's a little tiny board, mainly made up of keyboard. Most of the board is for the key switches. Okay, so it's got a little small keyboard built in, which is probably kind of going to be kind of cumbersome to use, but I haven't really used it a lot, so we're just going to do it now and have a good look at it. And it's not a bad machine. It's a very cheap thing to build, and it is based on a little Pi here. Okay, so that does all of the work basically. Most of the rest of the board is just an interface for joystick and keys, USB and power, etc. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this board and see what it can do. Okay, so this is the small ZX Pico. So it's basically a small motherboard, okay, and it's fairly well laid out. It's quite logical. You know, you've got the keyboard area down here, you have little tiny micro switches, which are nice and clicky. Actually, they actually feel decent to use. So, you know, they might be better than they actually look when you use the machine. You've got a small speaker here, and you've got extra switches along here as well, and also here, which is basically a cursor keys. Okay, it's also got a fire button, which is here, so you can actually use that button for certain bits of software and so on. Now, it's quite nice. The little Raspberry Pi is actually soldered directly to the board, so there's no header or anything that can work loose. It's literally on the board itself. Okay, now if you look at the back, 99% of the actual soldering is just putting on the key switches, because there are quite a lot of them. There's 4 solder joints per switch. Okay, the rest of it is VGA port, joystick port, USB port, power, and you have a small SD card, which is here, you can see here. Okay, so it's got a built-in SD drive, which is quite nice. So basically all of your software can be put on a small micro SD card, and then that's it. You don't really have to worry about it. Now, the only thing that I don't really like about this is the fact that it's not in a form factor that you can put this in a ZX Spectrum case, because it's not the same. It doesn't line up. There's nothing you can do with that. But the key switches feel very much like the key switched keyboard you could get for the ZX81 at the time. You'd get a replacement keyboard which sat on top of where the original keyboard went, and it was small plunger switches which felt very much the same as the little micro switches. So I'm kind of thinking that these might be okay. Now, everything else on the board, it's fairly usable. So on here we have VGA and joystick and a USB port. It is VGA only. Okay, so if you want to use it with a HDMI TV or a more modern TV, you'd have to buy a VGA to HDMI adapter, which they do work. I actually have one for one of my older PCs and they work really well. You've got micro USB as a power, and then there's your slot for your memory card just here, and it's a nice click unit. It's not just a push-in unit, so you know, it's quite tactile and you can really feel when the card's in there and not. Okay, so it's very, very decently laid out, so I haven't really got anything to kind of be down on this machine for. Now, if you're going to use it as a machine, I would probably put it in a project box. I think there are a couple of overlays which you can get for these keys, which then if you put it in a box with an overlay on it, you can just press the keys in a similar fashion to a membrane kind of top on it. But it's going to be quite difficult to put this into a project box or a case and make it a little less vulnerable to hands if they want to use it as a ZX Spectrum, which is what this is kind of really all about. So what's it like to actually use? Well, what you need is an old monitor, such as this little Dell unit here. This has been through the wars, it's covered in scratches, it's been kind of abused, but it still works. And you just need a standard VGA cable, and then that's it. You don't need to worry about sound because it's actually on board here. So the sound comes through the little speaker here. So shall we have a look at how it powers on and what it does? So the first thing you need to do is get yourself a micro USB power supply. You can buy these for original Raspberry Pi, or you can just get yourself a standard adapter and a lead and a cable, which will do exactly the same job. The problem you might have to worry about is try not to get something which is fast charger compatible for your power supply, because I think it'll overwhelm this little Pi. So again, you know, just get a standard charging unit. Next thing you need is your VGA cable for your monitor, which, you know, it's fairly normal stuff. It's quite nice fitting on the VGA adapters, but that's what I mean about this. It's kind of a little bit rough and ready, if you know what I mean. You're gonna either, if you have it on something nice, you're gonna scratch the hell out of the desk simply because it's all sharp soldered bits on the back, or you got to worry about people with sticky hands, or you know, if you're going to let your little ones use it, shorting things out, especially here, which isn't going to be a very good thing. So I think Going forward, I would probably mount this on the back of a monitor like this, and then have just a standard keyboard coming out to the front, so no one has to touch really any of this. Okay, and it kind of boots up. You may have to recenter or resize your monitor depending on what the display is actually like on there, but you know, it kind of looks like a ZX Spectrum. And you may not be able to hear the speaker. If I take the mic and take it right up to it, okay, so it's at the moment emulating really what is a standard 48K machine. Although it does have the 128K image in here, obviously you can run 48 software on it as well. So this speaker isn't brilliant. So what we'll do is we'll just go through a few of the features, okay? So on this board, you have your keyboard here. So if I want to select a game or something I've put on here, I can press this switch here and you get a list of options here, and you can use what is the cursor keys down here to kind of scroll up and down them. So if I want to do tape loader, and then if I want to choose a tape, these are some of the tap files which are on here, okay? So you can just scroll up and down and do it that way. But I want to go back to the menu, to the main screen again, sorry, and there is a way of actually flicking through the programs that are on here, and that's using this button here. So anything that's on will just automatically start when you flick it forward. So I'm just going to try and find a game here which actually has some decent music, which will show off the Spectrum 128 kind of version on here. And here we go. So we've got this one. Now if I bring this little mic down to here, you can actually hear it. It's alright, but the speaker on board is awful. It's terrible. So one of the modifications I may do to this is disconnect this entirely and put a small 3.5mm jack in this area here where there's nothing here, so I can actually mount the jack through here, mount it to the board, and just have two small tracer wires going to it. So then I can plug it into something decent like a TV with an input or an amp, and then you can hear the sound properly. So I'm just going to go back a minute. The other things you might find, it does actually replicate a Sinclair ZX Spectrum, the 48K model. The only problem you got is using the keys is a bit of a hit and miss affair. So you can probably find load, maybe that if you want to, delete, and if you do know the keyboard inside out without actually looking at the keys, then that will be fine, because it does actually work. So if I start typing on it just as normal, just trying out the keys, they actually feel quite good. I mean, you know, they're a little bit sharp on your fingers, but they're tactile and they're not as bad as you would actually think. And to be honest, I think they're a little bit more responsive than the original rubber keyboard that's on a ZX Spectrum. So yeah, that isn't too bad at all. So let's just find a game that we can play. Okay, so we're going to define the keys. So 4. So we'll do right, left, down, up, and fire, and hold. Okay, so we'll go have a game on this and see how it looks. I mean, it's not too bad if you're using it as games, but they do hurt your fingers after a while, these little key tops. I don't know if you can hear it, but the sound seems to have sped up a little bit, so I don't think it's perfect in its emulation. I think it's a little off. But it plays alright, it does what it should do. But I think the sound's a little bit off. So if we have a look at some more of the settings, okay, so we'll do a reset, and we've got CPU speed, and you got 3.5, 4 megahertz and unmoderated. Okay, so I kind of think that maybe it's a little bit fast on the 3.5 megahertz, but not by much. It just meant the music seemed to be a little bit quick. Audio on and off. You can reset your 48K Spectrum or 128K version. As you say, you can use both on here. And it's not bad. I mean, you can do quite a lot with it. The joystick, you've got a few choices, Kempston or Sinclair. And you can also do quick save on here, which is good. But really, you're kind of limited to what you can do on here in comparison to a lot of emulated machines. Such as the ZX has a much more rounded front end. You can do more with it. It kind of does a lot more. That sounds better. You've got more options on the CPU. You can speed it right up or have it bog standard. And but there again, it's a lot more expensive a machine to build. This one's relatively cheap. So if we just have a quick go and have a look at some of the other games on here, just to give you an idea. Jet Set Willy, and it looks pretty much like the original, and you can have a listen. You see, this one doesn't seem to have the slight timing issue with the sound, so it might just be that piece of software that Robocop didn't like this board very much. Okay, so we'll just try another one. Okay, so we'll try Manic Miner. Okay, that one actually sounds quite decent. Well, as decent as Manic Miner ever sounded, because it's not a very nice tune, but you know, it does work. And this one plays really well, so this is pretty decent. This is actually exactly like it should be. So I'm not going to be too down on it for kind of getting maybe one little timing issue on some of the on Robocop, or you know, that program itself, because it's all right. I mean, the machine does what it's meant to do, and it does it all right. Actually, it does it quite well. And the fact that you can just skip through your games is quite nice, because you don't even have to exit out of anything. You can literally just skip through to the next game and it will load it straight away. Okay, so what do I think of this? Well, I actually like it. It's got its limitations, let's say. It's not ever going to be a replica of a ZX Spectrum in the same way that this one is. And this is a replica ZX Spectrum, and it's got a Raspberry Pi in it with a ZX Spectrum case keyboard and so on. And you know, it's a bit more involved to kind of get right and to make it look like this, but it's more authentic when you use it, because it kind of feels like a ZX Spectrum and it looks like a ZX Spectrum and so on, where this really doesn't look like a ZX Spectrum. And if you look at the size difference, I mean, it dwarfs this little ZX Pico board, and that's saying something, because these are tiny anyway, really, when you think about it. Now, the fact that you can use it as a standard ZX Spectrum is a bonus. You would have to use a keyboard with this and get the little ZX Spectrum labeling on the keyboard to make it easier. But, and it's a really big but, and it's a good one, this will allow anybody to experience what a ZX Spectrum was like back in the 80s, as in the software, the games, the actual things you could do with the machine. And if you mounted this at the back of a monitor or with a HDMI adapter to the back of a TV and just use it with a joystick and a standard USB keyboard, it would make a nice little addition. And the fact that all you need to do is just put all your tape files and tap files, etc., on the SD card, and then that's it. It's literally a plug and play unit. And for that, it's got to make a lot of sense for people who just want to experience what, you know, the 1980s software was like. Would I use it instead of maybe one of these or a Harlequin or a Sisyph? Probably not, you know, because I do kind of like the feel and the touch and the way these look and interact with you as a user. And also something like this will give you the experience 100%, where something like this is only going to ever give you the experience of the games. So are they worth building? Well, yeah, you know, you're looking at a couple of hours really to solder it together, and it's relatively cheap, and it will get you into the world of retro computing. But if you're going to go down the route of doing your own, then the Harlequin kit is a good one to go for, but it's a much more involved project. So again, that's going to take you a little bit longer than a few hours. So again, it's another plus on this one. This is literally a few hours of soldering it together and making sure it works and testing it and so on. So yeah, it does have its plus sides. Would I recommend this over anything else? Well, it depends what you want to do, but I would rather recommend a Harlequin or a Sisyph than one of these, to be completely honest with you, although they are a good chunk more expensive and a lot more involved to do. So anyway, overall, it's not a bad machine. It's a nice little gadget. It's a nice little way into seeing what a ZX Spectrum could and couldn't do. So for that, it's nice to have the option. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you didn't get put off from buying one of these or putting one of these together yourself, because overall it's a nice little machine. So anyway, please subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.